Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today I have the opportunity to work on a Roddy fishing reel, and the badging is all missing, but a telltale sign that it's a Roddy is the side fish here. Now Roddy Roddy started out, Roddy was the fellow's name, and made fishing rods. They went and they made the fishing reels to complement the rods, and then eventually they were sold off to Penn, which is now Pure Fishing. So you may find some Roddy reels later that say Roddy by Penn, and not all Roddies are Penns, but there was a segment of them that became Roddy by Penn in the later part of their corporate history. We're going to take this reel apart for you. This is a nice 5,000 or 6,000 size, kind of compares with a Mitchell 306, maybe close to the 302, which is slightly larger. The idea behind this reel is saltwater fishing, and or deep lake or trolling. And this one came to me courtesy of Scott, who's been finding an awful lot of bargains in the flea markets out west. And he had asked me to take care of these, make sure they're all tuned up and ready to go fishing. So that's what we'll do today. First thing you want to do when you get a reel in for service, if it's not your reel and you don't know what's going on with the reel, well, the best thing to do is, of course, give it a test. So make sure that it turns. This one turns easily. Make sure that the bail is turning and flipping. It does. We've got a click mechanism here. Let's make sure that we have an override for that click. Well, that's the hold position. Well, we have a click in both positions. Let's see if we can swing it over here. There we go. We have the override. Okay. There's a little bit, it seems like there's a little bit more swing than there should be on that, but that's okay. And once you feel that you pretty much got it all down, then let's start taking the reel apart. I like to start by taking the exterior pieces off first. I'll start today by taking off the spool. We'll come back and service the drag washers in that spool in a little while. I like to take off the spool because it'll give me an idea of what's going on underneath. And underneath, this one again has very much a look and a feel of a Penn or a Mitchell reel at the time. This one probably has double springs in it. I can't really tell. That's your trip lever on this side, but we may have a double. No, maybe not. We definitely have a spring on this side. Not sure if we have a spring on that side. All right, well, one of the things I'm going to do, I noticed that there is a little shellacking from the grease just drying over time. I'm just going to flood that, and as I work on the reel, that penetrating oil will take care of itself. Next step, we'll remove the gear side handle. This is one of those collapsible handles. If you take it out enough, you can fold it in, get it out of the way. And just like what we did with the other piece, we'll just put some penetrating oil in here. That'll just dissolve any dirts in that might build up. And a couple of things while we're doing this, I wear a protective glove on my hand to keep the greases and dirt and the like off my hand. I take pictures along the way. I recommend that you do. I'm taking a video here, but if you are working on a reel for the first time, well, pictures will help you. They'll give you some milestones along the way in terms of what goes where and the orientation of the pieces and parts if you get stuck. So take some pictures. Use your cell phone camera. Use a digital camera. You can do a video if you like. Videos tend to capture everything, and I'd be lying if I said I never went back to my videos to find out what was going on in a particular reel at a particular point in time. And believe it or not, they're very useful when you open up a case and something shoots out of the case, like a spring. You can go back and look at that video to see where it may have landed, or at least what direction it went off in. 3 screws on the side will enable me to remove the main gear assembly. And underneath here, it's just dry. That's all. It's got old grease in there. But other than that, it's a pretty dependable setup. We have a large main gear. We have a crosswind stud with a brass or a copper ferrule on it that's going to glide in the channel for the crosswind block. We have a pinion gear. Most engineering in a reel is big gear turns small gear, turns the spool or the rotor in this case. And the crosswind gear makes the axle shaft go up and down so that the line gathers evenly across the width of the spool. I like to make sure that this is in the off position when I go to take the main gear out, because if there's springs or anything that are loaded in here, if you leave it in the on position, you could pull that spring out. And then secondarily, when you go to reinstall, well, that'll get in the way of a proper mesh there. We're going to do the same thing here. I use penetrating oil an awful lot in cleanup. I don't recommend it as a lubricant, but I do recommend it as a way to clean up. That'll dissolve the grease on the case here, and once it's dissolved, and you can see it acts pretty quickly, once it's dissolved, what I like to do is just make sure that you get to it right away and use the least abrasive source to clean up the rest of it. So if you can get it off with a paper towel, then go ahead and just use that paper towel. If you need a little bit more light scraping, but I'm using the tip of a screwdriver here, but just don't do anything that might mar the surface. And if you need a little bit more, go to a kitchen scrubby. Those are just quarters of a kitchen pad. And if you really need something dramatic, well, go to a steel wool, but only use a 4O, which is the very fine steel wool, and that one will at least give you a cleaning without roughing it up or abrading it too badly. We're going to do the same thing on the main gear over here. These slots on the main gear on the back, those slots are going to take the beak of the anti-reverse dog, and that's how you're going to stop your reel from pedaling in anti-reverse. Of course, you have an override here. The override feature is so that you can fight the fish and not use your drags by you providing the drag, basically, by letting the reel in and out as needed. Well, that's the back of the reel. That's nice and clean. We'll just wipe off the shaft. I don't notice anything going on there. And we're going to do the same thing on the face of this gear then. I'm going to take that penetrating oil, and here's a case where that's a little bit more dried, so we're just going to use the flat blade of that screwdriver to come in here, see if we can't bring some of that up. And this may be where you want to use a buff, and I want to make sure that this gets clean because I have that crosswind block, this one over here, is going to be riding in that channel, so you really don't want anything to impede the smooth operation of that. Check all of your teeth. There's nothing in these teeth at all. This is perfectly clean. Check them both ways. Check from the side view so that you see if they're not dulled or worn or warped or something. Check from the face to make sure that they're all uniform. In this case, they are both check out fine. And now we're going to use a fishing reel grease. I'm going to use Penn Precision Reel Grease, not because there's a family history here of Penn owning Roddy reels or anything. It's just a fishing reel grease. Don't try to use just general household greases or automobile greases or the like. Generally, they're not designed for marine use, and generally speaking, you're going to run into trouble if you don't pay attention to these reels. You let that stuff dry up. All right. I'm going to put a shot of oil underneath the anti-reverse dog. I'm going to make sure it's in the off position. I'm just going to reload that main gear, and we're just going to set that aside. That's the service of the main gear side of the fishing reel. We're going to turn our attention to the other side now, and there's 3 more screws here. If I didn't mention it, I'm putting my screws and the pieces that I removed from the reel into a parts tray. Parts tray is nothing more than the back of a fast food container, and it holds the pieces and parts, so I know where to go look for them when it's time to reassemble a reel. When you take these screws out, notice that these screws are smaller or shorter than the ones that I took out on the other side. Very important to note, so that when you go to reinstall, the small ones go on this side. Also, from an orientation standpoint, you want to check. I believe that you can simply turn this around. I have to check to change your orientation. There might be something more to it than that, so don't hold me there. There's 2 screws that hold the crosswind block take a picture right here. Notice that this looks like the letter T. It's not symmetrical in that the top is different. The top is different from the bottom. Very easy to turn this upside down when you go to reinstall. Good place to take a picture to note that the letter T, rather than upside down, is the way that this belongs. Again, there's going to be 2 screws on here. There's also 2 small washers on here under those screws. So if you've taken your reel apart and you found 2 small washers kind of on the ground there, well, they go behind that screw to hold the crosswind block in place. These reels are relatively simple in design. I love simplicity in design. I think sometimes we see some reels that get totally over-engineered. They try to do too much, and there's just more things that tend to break. To me, if you have a reel that's relatively simple in design, well, I give it bonus points. Particularly if it works well, and this reel will fish as long as you want to take it fishing. If you keep it up to snuff, keep it maintained. All right, just one more thing then. We have the nut on the bottom here. Now you can't get this with an open end wrench. It just won't work. You have a lip there. You're going to need to use a deep socket to get there. So I always keep my sockets in that close at hand because I tend to use them a lot. I'm also noticing as I'm doing this, there's a slight wobble in here, which means that this rotor nut here is probably not as tight as it could be. Right now I'm just kind of fishing around here. I'll find that right one eventually. So while I'm kind of just hunting around here, if you have a question on this reel or any reel in particular, and maybe you're working on one and you're a little stuck, if you leave that question in the comment section, I'll be happy to try and answer that question for you. Well, I finally found it. It's a 14 millimeter. I knew that. I just couldn't find it. And we're going to take the rotor off now. The first thing you want to do is test to see if it comes off in a traditional counterclockwise method. If it does, keep going. If you find any resistance at all, try turning it in the opposite direction. Some of these fishing reels are reverse threaded on those rotor nuts. If they are, then you need to stop what you're doing and turn it around so that you do it properly. All right, you can tell that the reason why this reel kind of stayed with the traditional is that you have a lockdown or a keyway here that's going to hold your spool tight. That goes into my parts tray. A little bit of cleanup here. Remember we sprayed that earlier and there was some tarnish and the like. We'll get that off right now with that paper towel. Just check to make sure that the firing is going as needed. And then we'll oil the seams of your bail. When you oil the seams of your bail, just work it in a couple of times. Just make sure it performs nice and easily. And make sure that it kind of cranks back. All right, I'm going to leave that off to the side for a moment. There's 2 screws and a little kind of a point. That point is what's going to be your bail trip. You can see the ramp and all here. We're going to take the tops of this assembly off here so that we can get to the bearing. I think there's a bearing in here. And try to fix that. I'm going to see, I think this may just be a screw here. Alright, let's see what happens when we take the 2 of these off. Been a while since I've worked on one of these. Yeah, I got to get a I'm probably going to use the pliers. I don't recommend pliers, but there we go. So this little pointed piece is in fact a nut. I don't have a plier, or I don't have the driver for this piece that's so small. I'm just going to be careful so that I don't ruin the edges so that we can get it back in. And as soon as I have the hand strength to turn that out, we're going to do it that way. So, good point here. Notice the orientation of these pieces. So that's quite a big screw there. It's pointing directly at the back of the handle, and the ramp is on that plane. So just make sure that you do it that way. And these pieces I'm not going to put into my parts tray because as soon as I service this top end, I'm going to come right back to them. But if you do put your pieces on your workbench, make sure that you're aware of what it is that you're doing. It's very easy to move your hand, knock the pieces and parts around, and then, well, you're in trouble there. Okay, we're going to remove the assembly. That was easy enough. Just clean up that collar a little bit. I'm going to use the steel wool for that. It's kind of shellacked on there. And even though this stuff is not going to come in contact with any moving parts, it's good to have a clean piece. All right, those go over there. Here's our bearing assembly. There's a little kind of a metal shim washer that's pretty thick there. And we're going to have our bearing. This appears to be a shielded bearing. I'm going to oil that bearing. Now remember when we did the test, we didn't find anything that was annoying or struggling with that bearing. So just a little bit of oil. I'm going to take a wire brush now. I'm going to clear all the channels in the main pinion gear. As you can tell, I keep a lot of my tools right on my bench and within easy reach of where my work surface is. And the reason for that is I don't like to put the projects down if I can avoid it, only because if I walk away from the project, I just may have a tough time remembering where I left something, forget a step in the reassembly, something like that. So to the extent that you can kind of get into the project and kind of keep it going all the way through, all the better for you. All right, I think we're pretty much done with that. I'll do one more wipe. I'm going to do one more squirt down. There's just a little bit of residual grease on this. I'm going to flood that with the penetrating oil. Quick wipe off. And we're pretty much good to go on a reassembly here. A little bit of grease onto the shaft here where that bearing is going to ride, and a little bit of grease into the pinion gear, which hasn't seen grease in quite some time. We saw that when we opened it up. There wasn't any damage. There wasn't a lot of dried grease, but there wasn't any kind of grease at all to speak of. All right, if we remember the assembly, then the bearing is next, and then this big shim is going to go under the bearing. So push that in and down, grab your bearing collar, push that in. You want to take the shield here that's going to be both a tie down and the trip lever for your rotor. In this case it's hard to mess up because the two small Phillips head screws have a smaller diameter on the thread size than the one in the back, which is the one that is going to cause the trip there. I was getting a little nervous there. I said you have to be aware of what's going on if you leave your parts on the desk, and well, one of them just slid over a little bit there, and it's a kind of a reminder. Be careful if that's kind of the way you're headed. Just trying to get these started. Those of you that watch my videos know sometimes me and these little screws, we have a little bit of a disagreement. There we go. And then the other one is going to be kind of hand tighten. Hand tighten as much as we can. That's kind of a micro nut there. And we got the pinion gear came out, that's all right. Micro nut there, so just be careful with it. Imagine if I dug down deep in my socket sets, I could probably find something, but just be careful and know that you don't want to mess up this side with the pliers. And that's for the next person that gets to repair that or service it. Right, that goes in. We can take our rotor, that goes on. Take our rotor key. So you want to do two things with this key. The first thing is you want to line it up with the squared section or the flat sections of the piece, and you want to turn it until it lines up with that little stud in the rotor. And you can grab your lockdown washer, you can grab your rotor nut, you can grab your ratchet, and if you want, give it a quick spin now, and that's operating beautifully. All right, time to get going with the rest of this then. We're going to put a little bit of grease into the indentation where the stud is going to ride, and a little bit onto there, which is where the back end of this is going to ride. And this one goes through, and this is what I was saying about the letter T. You need to make sure the orientation is correct when you go to install the axle shaft. The axle shaft just gets a light coating of grease. Any more than that, it's only going to get scraped off going through the pinion gear. We want to line this up. Find the two holes now. Those are for the screws. Then you can go get a cup of coffee while I struggle with getting these little screws in, or the beverage of your choice. Actually, these are a little bit better. There's indentations that hold it. Remember the small washer behind this? I kept those small washers on the screws, but again, you may find yourself looking for a washer on your desk, or looking for a home for the washer on your desk because you weren't paying attention when you did that. All good. All right, that's your cross line block. So again, two screws, letter T facing up, and you can grab your grease one more time. Just throw a little bit onto the shoulder on both sides here where that's going to ride. All right, take it at this point. That's the cover. Remember what I said, the smaller length or shorter length screws go in this one. I'm going to have to take a look, see if this is reversible, if you can convert this over to a right-hand crank rather than a left-hand crank. Not sure. All right, two more. So that's two things I got to look for. I got to figure out what the model number is for this. So that's a little clue here. If you're at a flea market and you see a rod or a reel you like, when you're negotiating with the vendor, one of the things you want to do is negotiate on condition. Now, this condition of this reel is in pretty good shape. The paint is nice. It appears to be minimum use. What's missing? Its badge. So if somebody starts telling you it's collectible, well, it's going to have points taken off of it in collectability if it doesn't have the badge. Sometimes things are obvious, sometimes they're not, so you do what I did at the start of this video. You do a full mechanical test on it just to make sure that the pieces and parts perform as they should. Here's your main gear. This is the stud that we need to marry to the indentation. Do this one visually and just sort of line it up. And then one way, before you go too far, turn this and make sure that your axle shaft is going up and down before you start putting all the screws back in. I'm going to hand start these. Again, they kind of did me a favor here. They put a little collar in that side plate. So It was not as bad as some of the things that I've become accustomed to. All right, while we're doing this, if you're like Scott, if you have a reel that you would like to have serviced and you don't want to do it yourself, well, I do repair these by mail. And if you send a note to my email, I'll be happy to provide you with that service and repair information. The idea behind this channel is to show you how to do it. That's kind of what got me going on this. It was, well, I can't repair all of the reels in the world, and I can't service them for sure. And I'd like to teach people how to do that before I can't do it anymore. All right, the handle is on. That's a nice smooth operating reel. Remember, we have that in the off position, so come on over here and put the anti-reverse back on. And now the last part of this is servicing the drag washers. The drag washers are on the top of the spool. There's nothing on the bottom. This is a little click that lets you know that the drag is being played out. That's going to wrap on the saw teeth of the ratchet here. But inside is where the drag washers are. This is held in place by a C-clip. And you want to pry that C-clip out. It's a spring, so you want to hold it so that it doesn't shoot somewhere and have you taking some time trying to find that. This always takes the brunt of the fishing. The line's coming in off the pole with water. The water is coming under the drag adjuster and it's settling into the drags. So these need to be serviced every time you go to service a reel. I'm going to take these off and try and note the sequence to this. Got you can see how much debris is on these. You have a hard washer in the bottom there. You can play around with it if you want. I'm going to leave it there. I don't want to rip it up, and it's not one that needs to be serviced. It's holding the piece firm for the base of the spool. These are just discolored for the most part. They're not dirty. But you can see that there's been wear on these. This is a traditional 6-washer drag set. And what you want to do when servicing the drags is you want to make sure you get all the dirt off the metal ones. And you want to make sure that the washers themselves are not worn, torn, or in other ways scarred. You're going to find a variety of washers in fishing reels. You'll find Teflon, you'll find leather, you'll find today's reels have Carbon-Tex in them. There's all types of washers and there's different ways to service each one. These are some kind of a hard washer, but they do appear to have be porous, and if they're porous you can put a little bit of grease on them. I'm going to use a fishing reel grease. I'm going to put it on by rubbing it in with my hand. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put this back on the reel because there's a slot in the axle shaft here, and it's always easier if you load your drag washers that have these little slot assemblies in them right into the spool and put it on the reel. That's the second of the washers. The middle washer is always what's called an eared washer. It's the one with the points. The points go into the center slots in the spool. Got one more we're going to use here. We'll get that grease on it. We'll spread it with that gloved hand. Put that on. And we're going to take that last washer, put that into that slot, and then we can finish this off by pushing that down and putting that little C-clip back in. And just a note here, when you're putting that clip back into the groove, try and make it so that the points of the clip on each side do not go into the slots here. It's a better or more firm fit. While I got that off, I'm just going to take one of the little scrubby pads. I'm going to put a rod and reel cleaner on. I use a pen rod and reel cleaner just to kind of polish it up, make it pretty, and get any grease or debris that may have either transferred from the work that I've done or may have been on there as a result of use. See if we can't clean that up while we're at it. Okay, once you're done loading the drags, then you want to tighten down the drag adjuster. Make sure that it's holding nice and firm, and back it off after you're done with that adjustment. Make sure that it's nice and smooth. You do that so that it doesn't compress the washers that we just serviced, doesn't bleed out the grease, and doesn't compress the washers to shorten the useful life of that. All right, with that in place, then it's time for a test. Turns nice and smooth and easier, even nice and smoother than it was initially, because we saw as we did this that there was no grease inside. Well, you heard the click, click, click. Let's move it to the off position then, and let's turn that to make sure that there's a nice smooth operation to it, and there is. Sometimes that click can disguise another noise in there, so turn it off if you have the opportunity to turn it off. Let's check the bail. The bail flips nice and easily. Remember what we did here. We oiled the seams of both, and we oiled the trip lever there. So this is the Roddy reel. We'll find out what that model is and post it in the repair description when it's posted as a video. It's a nice 5000 series or 6000 series reel, circa late 1970s, early 1980s. Manufactured probably in Japan. It doesn't say on here, but I'm thinking this is a Japanese reel, and it's a beauty. So I hope you've enjoyed that. And if you like it, please indicate it. Again, please subscribe if you like these types of videos. To our first responders and essential personnel, thank you for everything that is that you've been doing to keep us safe during the pandemic. And to everybody, please stay safe, stay well, and stay watching. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.